Welcome back. We're going to do a copy of a drawing by an Italian artist named Salviati today. And this portrait is a head definitely tipped downward. We can't see the eyes. We're going to start with the cranium. As always, and it's slightly foreshortened and it is tipped downward. And we're going to think about the face. Also tipping at an axis perpendicular to the cranium. So the cranium's kind of going this way, maybe not that much. Face is going this way. The center line of the face is over here. The angle of the jaw is raised. We're not going to wait until the very end to put the neck on. We're going to just imagine the neck as a kind of cylinder form under the head. And we're not going to wait to do the shoulders either. We're going to think about this curve of the shoulders and where it passes through the head. So all these things are going to help us make sense of this pose. And this part, just blocking this in is pretty spontaneous. But now we're going to check our work. And the main thing we want to check is the back of the cranium is about here, level with the back of the ear. There's the side of the head. And where is the bridge of the nose? That's our main question. If we get this ratio wrong, we're not going to succeed with the drawing. And I would say it is a little less than a third of the way over. So if you imagine this line, let's place this line correctly. There's the bottom of the chin. There's the top of the cranium. The line of the eyes is below the middle. So let's place that below the middle. And then we want to make sure the bridge of the nose, this is a little less than a third of the way of this, a third of this overall space. So if we measure this, we go 2 more times, we should end up at about the jawline. That probably would have been a smarter way to think about it. If we don't go to the back of the cranium, if we just go to the jawline, this is about exactly a third of the way over. So from here to here, 1, 2, 3. Count them. Make sure this is in the right place. If the bridge of the nose is not in the right place, you cannot succeed. Okay. So now we're going to look for the angle of the eyes. We know roughly where they are, but can you see how this line is virtually horizontal? So let's go ahead and make sure this line is just a little lower than the line I had before. This corresponds to the bottom of the lids. And it is just about horizontal, so make sure yours is as well. And interestingly, this line is almost exactly 90 degrees to that eye line. So that line's at the right side of the bridge of the nose, just about straight down. And we can check how long the nose is. This horizontal, remember, is our eyelids. Here's the tip of the nose. It's a little more than halfway down. Now, why is the nose so long, you're wondering? It's because when the head tips down like this, the tip of the nose lowers in relation to the bottom of the face. The bottom of the face is now foreshortened. So that's what we're seeing here. So we're bringing this down, and that's hard to get right because how many times have I told you not to make the nose too long? But it has to come down a little further in this position. And I'm going to just block in a little line for the curve of the mouth. Notice the corner of the mouth is coming up almost as high as the tip of the nose. And please don't draw anything more definite than I am, because I'm not really sure about these placements yet. As you'll remember, I like to have some shading before I firm up my idea of my placements. So this is a very general kind of blocking in. From the outside tip of the nose to the inside corner of the eye is straight shot up. So that puts this eye sort of like that. And the same holds on the other side. Look, we go up from the outside of the nose here. This eye is going to be a little more foreshortened because it's turning up and away from us. And one thing we've been struggling with is getting a sense that our chin in a 3/4 view is set back behind the bottom lip. So here's the egg of the chin. Here's the sort of sausage of the lower lip. And you see how they relate to each other? And I'm going to go ahead and do the ball of the nose. Like, start to look at these volumes and see how they move left and right, because that's the way we describe how far out things are projecting on a 3/4 view. So see, we've got from this ball to this sausage like that, from the sausage to the egg like that. And I'm going to block in a little bit of an indent here. And before I really assess my work or yours, I now want to start to understand this form with light and dark. So I'm going to do a shadow map. Comes down just to the outside of this eyelid, comes up over the eyelid a little, comes under the eye a little. Yep. So this shadow edge comes around here. There's a cast shadow under the nose. Cast shadow on the neck. Block in the hairline. And a shadow shape inside the bridge of the nose here. I'll give you a minute. I hope everyone can see what I'm seeing. I'm just doing a rough approximation of these basic shadow shapes. You see that? And this piece over here. But this is still a lump of wet clay, okay? We are not committed to anything yet. We're just trying to work it make a volume out of it. So now first shading. I'm not even putting an ear on this person until I can see the head as a volume. There are a lot of other ways to draw. It is possible you could spend a week on this and measure every point and get every outline perfect and then start shading. Our goal is to be able to do a head in 30 minutes or less, so we're not using that method. This is a kind of a shortcut. We're allowing our brains to see what's happening in 3 dimensions, and then that allows us to get to a drawing that we can refine much quicker. And you see how my drawing is not very beautiful or accurate, but it's at a point now where I can start to push and pull these shadow shapes around and get it and make it better, because my brain now recognizes that I'm looking at a volume, and I can see like the cheek here is projecting too far past this eye, which I couldn't see before because I was just seeing a web of lines. That's really the big idea here, is accelerating the point at which we have a volume to look at, and then we can really quickly make corrections to that volume. You see how I just brought this chin up a little? And your corrections will be different, but you've given yourself such an advantage just by that first shading. I hope the wet clay analogy makes sense to you. If you've ever sculpted, you get that big hunk of wet clay. So I can see enough of volume now that I could place my ear. And here I'm going to use some horizontal landmarks. So the earlobe is around the same point as where the apex of this curve of the cheek. So that's about here, and the top of the ear is sort of the center of the forehead. And that ear gives your brain a lot of information about how the head is tilted, because the position of ears on the skull is really one of the more consistent features of the human head. Like, people have huge chins or small chins, or long noses or short noses, but the ear is always going to be fixed by the position of the ear hole, which is really a stable and consistent feature of the skull. Okay, I'm going to suggest that you just put your pencil down for just a second. And because we're doing this drawing in a hurry, all your results are going to be a little different. But what I want you to do is watch what I do here, and then you're going to do the same thing in your drawing. I'm going to try to put my drawing as close as I can get it to my reference. I'm going to back away from both of them a little bit, like this. And I'm going to ask myself what looks like the most wrong about my drawing. And notice that the smaller I make my drawing, the easier it is to see those differences. So I'm going to say, everyone just take a break from your work for a second. I just want you to see what I'm seeing here. So I'm looking at this not as a drawing of a woman, but as a pattern of dark and light. And what I'm seeing is this curve on my drawing is coming out a little too far. So I'm going to bring that back. The width of the light on this eyelid is a little too small. So I'm going to pull this light slightly to the right, and I just noticed that I'm missing this light up here, that's why the eye looks too small. You're gonna do this on yours in a second, but do you see how the key here is like just to get far away, which you can do I did it by zooming out. You're going to do it by just stepping away from your work. And without becoming too definite about anything, just sort of moving the lights and darks around, pushing them and pulling them until the pattern of light and dark in the drawing corresponds more perfectly to the pattern in the original. I see one more thing, which feels like the bridge of my nose is just sticking out a tiny bit too far. And I could be a little more definite about this shadow shape here. So this is not perfect, but I feel okay now about this the general effect that I'm producing. And as we talked about last time, it's really important to nail down that general effect before you have become too definite about the forms of the individual features, because your brain will allow you to recognize a face just on the basis of the features, and you don't want to give it that opportunity until the big shapes of light and dark are established. So I'm going to give you a few minutes now to make the same sorts of corrections in your work. Okay, we are going to block in some forms of the hair now, whether you're ready or not. So I'm going to give you a basic outline. And so notice from this ear, we're going to go horizontally, and then we're going to arch over the head. Notice that this space from here to here is equal to the space from the foreline to the center of the cheek. So from the hairline to the center of the cheek, so here to here. So that brings us way up here for the top. And getting enough space above the drawing is really important to get the head look like it's tipping down, because when the head tips down, you see a lot more of the top surface of the cranium. And we're going to block in this fold, this little hair piece. Here's our little braid. This is really a fancy hairdo. I noticed that I've got the neck a little too thick. The neck doesn't come quite to the back of the earlobe. And look at how beautifully drawn this little ear is. We're going to zoom in on this. So here's the outside of the helix. There's the tragus. And there's the antitragus. And that's about it. Look at how simple that is. I hope you can see that this artist was right-handed, because most of the shading lines are arcing opposite the way mine are. And I'm going to get a little more definite with the form of this eye now. This is going to be a quick study. Just do your best to keep up with me, but there's not really time to do a lot of revisions now. So I can see that I've got to bring the light on the cheekbone a little higher up. And here I'm going to hatch the same direction as the original around that eyelid. And a little shadow accent under the lash line. This is a great dryness study for hatching direction because it does have an overall right-handed flow, but it also has a lot of very subtly handled contour shading and very clearly articulated shadow edges. Mostly pretty soft shadow edges, as we were talking about earlier, probably seated the model by a window. So it's a large and unfocused light source. And when you see the shading on this cheek, I want you to think back to the lessons we've had on drawing spheres and eggs. You see how all these hatched lines are just arcing over that shadow edge and then disappearing, lifting the pencil off with every stroke as you move from the dark into the light. And then here's this core shadow of the cheek gradually fading into a reflected light down below. So same movements, we're just releasing the pencil with every stroke as we move down towards the light, going down and up. This drawing is really too lovely to receive this kind of rush treatment, but so this along here is not a shadow, it's a halftone. So don't press as hard along the side of the nose here, just we're barely touching the pencil to the paper. So it's easy to overlook the hatching on the tip of the nose because we often find a lot of reflected light bouncing up into there. But this is a shadow form. It's a lot lighter than some of the surrounding forms, but that's one way to make your nose look flat every time, is to not pay attention to this shadow. And one of the reasons it looks so light is because it's got this much darker zone right under it. A lot of people don't make that cast shadow dark enough because your brain's telling you that you're creating a mustache. It kind of stands out too much. But if you just trust the process and then go dark enough in the other surrounding areas, see, I'm going a little darker on the line between the lips, like this. And a little darker in the cast shadow under the bottom lip. And you see what happens, the shadow under the nose isn't as noticeable anymore. We're really going to pay attention to the asymmetry of the mouth. That's something that we've been talking about a lot, but here's our central curve of the mouth. Here's the wing on the left, and the wing on the right is foreshortened down to almost nothing. So we've got this tiny portion here is the same as this much larger portion over here. Notice this drawing is very clean. There's no smudging at all, which is pretty amazing when you consider just how soft and tonal an effect he's getting, just using a fairly sharp drawing implement on probably a soft laid paper. My drawing's not going to be developed to that degree of softness, but you can appreciate from this original just how far you can take that if you spend enough time. One thing I always learn looking at great master drawings like this is how mindlessly I sometimes approach my drawing. You see how I always like to reinforce this cast shadow under where the upper lip casts a shadow onto the bottom lip. But you see how in this original, when we turn the corner here, that shadow kind of disappears underneath the upper lip and softens. So our goal is going to be to draw it just the way he did and not just fall into old habits of the way we think things are supposed to look. It's also kind of fascinating how, despite how tonal this drawing appears at first glance, there really are some clearly outlined forms, like the tip of the nose here. not with a dark line, but very crisply indicated. And just amazingly subtle transitions occurring all over the place. Here's this halftone on the side of the nose, complete with a little brightening around the ala, a little darkening under the ala. Again, my instinct is just to darken stuff, but if we look back at this eye, look at how it really doesn't get as dark as you would expect, and he's keeping it. He's keeping that eye very soft. There's that clear little shelf of light of the lower lid and this rounded contour shading on the upper lid. But overall, no firm mark making around that eye. Which, my tendency would be to just go really dark there, assuming that shadow under the eyelid is going to be very crisp and dark, but he's deliberately softening it. Sort of like that. This would be a great drawing to do a really close copy of. Like really try to draw every mark. But that would be a much bigger time commitment than what I'm up to today. This eye also, look at that, that's really soft, darkening. It's really amazing how clearly the gaze reads in this original drawing, despite the fact that we can't see the eyes. And except through these very soft, blurred little slits. This shadow under the eye is almost as dark as the eye itself. And look at how the form of this eyelid transitions to the forehead. And then this line of the cheek comes up behind it like that. So somehow I overlooked there is an actual shadow shape sort of right in here where the cheek on this side is turning away from the light. So we're going to add that now. And without that shadow, you'll notice my face looks really pretty flat. And then it sort of tapers. This looks You could almost read this as an outline here, but it's actually the same form shadow tapering down towards the chin. And we've got this very clear contour shading emerging on both sides from the corners of the mouth, curving up around the form. And a very gradual transition on the top of this shadow. Where we move into the light that's striking the cheekbone. Back out a little bit again. And on this side. Feeling like the gaze in my drawing is not directed to my left, it's sort of straight down. And I'm frankly a little confused how that effect is being created, because we can't see the eyes. And it occurs to me that it's actually probably the shape of the eyelids. There's this slight, especially the lower lid, right here, you see that? It's like bulging down a little towards the left, and very subtly right here as well. It's sort of like pushing down. And that's helping a little. As you know, if you've ever watched anyone dream, you can see the pupils moving back and forth, the irises under the eyelids. I don't know if you're able to see that on the screen right now, but that is because the irises project they're raised above the surface of the eyeball. So it's really kind of interesting in this drawing, the direction of the glance is really represented by that asymmetry, the iris sort of pushing that lid out. And that's probably about as good as I'm going to get that right now, but it's a little more true to form. So I'm going to try to bring this halftone down a little, just to, there's a little bit of light on the bottom lip right there. And just on that bottom lip where it turns up, that'll do it. A little more definition to the bridge of the nose. And I can see that my cheekbone needs to be a little higher still, so I'm going to move this up. When you get this far along in a drawing, every defect is going to jump out at you in a way that it's never going to when you're starting out. So that's why artists delay committing to their placements. Not all artists, but many artists. And I'm feeling like I have just a little too much space for this jaw. I'm going to just bring this in just a tiny bit. I often end up with a little too much width across my faces. And I'm projecting a little too far on my forehead now. You'll notice that don't need to use the eraser too much to make these corrections. I've been kind of vague from the outset, so I'm going over things just a little bit darker. And our goal at this stage, when we started out, you'll recall I was trying to create a pattern of light and dark. And our assessment was in terms of two-dimensional pattern. And now that the forms are more legible, I'm looking at this as a three-dimensional form and modifying things that are reading where the form is reading a little bit off. So there's a real change in mindset from the early stages of the drawing to the later stages. And we're going to just quickly finish up now with some of these hair elements, not all of them. I've already blocked in the main shapes. Now I'm going to turn my blocking into curves. And I don't care if these are exactly right because they're not details that contribute to the likeness, obviously. And I'm not going to erase my blocking either. I'm just going to leave it there and go over it with these much firmer contour lines. Really interesting kind of neck fold here. I guarantee you that's an exaggeration of whatever he was seeing. Very clear shading on the neck. Contour shading, just like shading a tree trunk. And curving around the form. Down into that bit of the neck. Get a little more definition, this light around the cheekbone. And a little more shadow on the upper lip. And I really don't feel like spending all day on these braids. I'm just going to block this in. And I'm noticing that everything on this side of the head, as I would expect, is in shadow. So I'm going to throw a little veil of first shading over all this, including the ear, and sort of unify that part of the drawing. And As I implied earlier, this is not a close study. This is a free or loose study, so there's all kinds of stuff in this original that I'm not gonna be faithfully copying. The last step in any drawing is usually to balance the darks. And sort of what I'm doing is squinting and looking at the original, and squinting and looking at my drawing, and I'm seeing where my darks are popping a little too much, like along the jawline. Should be much softer, or not enough, like on the cheekbone, through the core shadow. Not enough under the nose, right there. Not enough on the side of the neck, over here. Not enough right here behind the forehead. And on this piece of veil. And I'm seeing that I put this little dimple on the chin a little too far to the left. It's actually it's amazing to me how often I find myself drawing sort of mechanically without attempting to read the forms as I'm drawing them. That happens a lot when I'm distracted, if I'm listening to the radio or not giving the drawing my full attention. It's a sort of higher level of challenge to, as you're drawing the form, be reading the form, like seeing the drawing as a three-dimensional object, and you're basically sort of tricking your brain into believing that you're actually touching and sort of sculpting this three-dimensional thing, and not just applying different varying levels of dark to a two-dimensional surface. It's actually a little harder for me to make that happen when I'm talking to you, because I'm thinking about what I'm saying. That leaves a little less of my brain available to both draw and read the three-dimensional forms of the drawing as I'm creating them. But it's something that we should all aspire to. And when you see highlights, like the highlight on the eyelid here, there's no white in this drawing, obviously, so those lights are just created by placing halftones around them. There's a little highlight on the forehead. So I'm going to bring down the rest of the forehead slightly. I usually hate these copies as I'm finishing them because there's just so many beautiful elements in the original that I know I'm missing. And when I'm looking at my screen right now, I'm seeing what you're seeing, which is my drawing next to the original, and so I'm aware of all the problems in my drawing. But then I usually pin them up on the wall and don't look at them for a couple weeks and forget what the original looked like, and they usually look a lot better after I've forgotten just how great the original was. Apparently this drawing may have been once thought to have been done by Leonardo da Vinci, but later attributed to someone else because the smile reminds some people of the smile of the Mona Lisa. Here I'm just going back to my first shading direction and unifying this area. Okay, thanks for watching, and that's going to do it for today.